Hello everyone, welcome back to another video of Next.js playlist, and today we are going to talk about server actions. In this video, we will know what server action is, why exactly it is useful, what is pitfall, if there are any disadvantages of those, and also understand a few patterns that you need to keep in mind while using server actions. At the end of it, we'll also learn building something really cool using server actions. If you have watched my last video where I have introduced chat-cn with Next.js, we have built a form to subscribe for our newsletter. We're going to implement that along with storing the user data into the database and sending an real email to the user who subscribed to the newsletter. All these things we are going to take care using the server actions. Of course, if you like this video, please post a like, and if you have any questions, you can post them below as a comment. I'll definitely respond back, and don't forget to subscribe. Let's go get started. Let me introduce server action to you with the help of this diagram that you are seeing on your screen. Let's assume this is a user. I know that it's not a great drawing of a user, but assume that this is a user and this is this user's browser or any handheld devices that we call as client. And this is a server which is there far somewhere, and the server is interacting with various services, databases, maybe the cloud services, etc. Now this guy, our user, makes a request from your client to the server, and the request goes, and after the request has been served, there is a response that come back from the server to the client. It's a regular stuff. Now let's imagine that you have a form over here in the client that this user is filling up. And after submitting the form, that form has to submit some data over the network to this particular server, where the server will receive the data that this user is submitting through this form. And then after receiving the data, it's going to perform certain computations. After performing certain computations, maybe it has to store some data into a database, or it will use a cloud service to send an email, or it will probably generate an PDF, or it could be getting an access token and sending you back to store it into your cookie when the response come back to the client. So this many operations we have seen day in day out in the React application, and I'm sure a form like this is not at all new to you. Look at this form. It's a very simple JSX using React that we have written. There's a form. The form is having an onSubmit property. On submit of the form, this particular method has to get called, and this is what is written is a function over here. And we are saying the method is post. That means we are making a post call, the HTTP method, and it has a bunch of fields like, select your favorite brand, which is like a select box, and then input box, and there is a submit button and the reset button. A form like this is very usual. Once the form is getting submitted, we are going to read the form data over here. From here, we're going to make an API call. This is how the form at the client side, a form like this, is connecting to your server through the API call. And once the API call goes in, it means you're sending a request from the client to server using all this data that user have filled in this form. And in the server side, you are making a lot of computations, lot of stuff. For example, in this form, you are going to add certain items into the cart. So it means that the data that you want to add to the cart, you're sending over the where using this API call, and in this case it could be REST API call. And once that is done, you get the response back. You change your component state to make sure that you reflect if it is successfully done, or if there is an error. In that case, what is the error message? If it is successfully done, what is the next thing that you need? This is a very common scenario in any React.js application. Now imagine that if we don't have this REST APIs, if we don't have this request response mechanism in between at all, what if you have the actions or the functionality that you want to invoke through a form submission already available in the server side itself? In the example that we have seen previously in the code, on submit, the method that we were calling add to cart was at the client side. From that client side, you're invoking through the REST API or any other mechanism a call to the server. But here, on the contrary, what we are saying, the action that is going to perform different kind of functionalities like sending an email, downloading an PDF, or getting a cookies or whatever it is already residing into the server. That means the logic inside this action is co-located to your server and very near to your data store or the services that this particular action is intended to interact with. Now, if this action is residing on the server and it is getting executed on the server, we will call this particular action as server action. As simple as that. So the definition of the server action is, it is a normal JavaScript function or a TypeScript function. It's an async function because it should execute asynchronously, and it resides on the server, and it executes on the server, it performs its operation on the server, and once the operation has been done, there should be a way to tell the client that I am done with the operation. Now you go ahead and refresh yourself. You should get the updated data based on the operation that I have done. That's fair enough, but where exactly is gonna be really useful? There are many places a server action can be useful. Just now, the example that we have taken from the client side of it, we were making the REST calls, right? Now, what if the REST call, whatever you have, you don't want to make public? There is no public consumer for that. So for that, you don't have to really develop REST services at all. Rather, within your code itself, within your UI code, UI infrastructure itself, you can expose certain functions, mark them as server action, and you can consume them directly into your server components, also in client components. We are going to see that when you're going to talk about the patterns of using server actions. So it is very useful to cut down some of the extra baggage of information sharing protocols or extra baggage of development. Rather, you want to get started with defining your functions and the functionalities within that. Some of the usages I have already told them. Maybe you want to interact with database. Yes, you can do that with server action. You want to do certain kind of services like sending an email or create a PDF, want to make it downloadable, you can do that. You want to send a auth token, want to get it added to the cookies, yes, you can do that. So there are varieties kind of use cases where the server action comes in handy. Before we get started with hands-on coding and building stuff, I want to talk about the server actions invocation patterns. It is always great with a framework like Next.js that we understand certain patterns and how to use stuff, not randomly picking up and start using it, or taking inspiration from some existing examples, lifting it and then start using it. You might find things working, but at the long run, you will have things breaking, or there will be more complexities in your application for not following certain patterns. So let's start with server action invocation patterns. In future, we will also see a video where we're going to talk about the patterns where server components and client components come together. This is going to be a great video because that's where a lot of architectural pieces I'm going to connect. And if you have not seen the video where I've explained how server components work internally and how to build an application using Mongo and everything, after the explanation, there is a video about it, and the link of that video is in the description of this video. You can check it out. All right. So the server action invocation pattern. First of all, we are talking about actions, and we have already spoken about forms. Why we have spoken about forms while talking about actions? Because in web development, most of the cases, the word actions that comes along with the form, because form has an attribute called actions. Whenever we submit a form, we can invoke an action. So it means that we can define a function and we can pass that function to the action attribute of a form. And whenever there is a submit button gets clicked, that particular action will be automatically invoked. There is another way that we can invoke an action without an action attribute. We have something called onSubmit, a particular event handler for a form. So whenever there is a submit button gets clicked, this onSubmit get called, and on onSubmit as a value, we can pass any function that we want to invoke when somebody clicking on the submit button. So there are multiple ways we can actually invoke functions to perform certain functionalities from the form. We know this is a HTML JavaScript level thing. You don't have to know Next.js for this. Now, as we're talking about server actions, these server actions some way is replacing the way that form is being handled from the client side, and more about the actions are in the server side. The benefit of it we have seen just now, because your actions are co-located to your server, they are much more close to your data store, so they can perform the things much more faster. Your form data don't have to travel from the client to server over network. There are less amount of latencies and all these advantages that we already know. Now, when you talk about the server action invocation pattern, there are two things that you need to consider. If the invocation happening from a form or it is happening without a form. So that's why, is it with a form? Yes, or it is without a form. If it is with a form, then the next thing, where is this form is getting submitted from? It is getting submitted from a server component or a client component, or maybe the action itself is getting passed as a props. We are going to see example of each of these things. Okay, we are going to build example for each of these things. Now, if it is not using a form, that means there is no form actions, there is no form on submit. There might be just a button, and on that button there is an on click. So on click of that button, also we can invoke a server action. So that is another pattern that we're going to see. Or there is no button. There is a simple client component and there is a use effect. We all know about use effect hook. If you're new to it, I have a video for it. Please check it out. If it is a use effect, if there is a use effect in the component, from use effect also we'll be able to invoke the server actions. So we are going to see example of all these 5. Among these, one of the example we are going to go little deeper, where we are going to solve the use cases. The server action is going to interact with the MongoDB. At the same time is going to send a mail to a recipient that we want to. So guys, do you remember this form? Yeah, that's the one that we built in our last video when we discussed ShatCN with Next.js. And there we have built this form ground up along with a card component at the right side. What this form is doing, basically it has a full name and email, and once we submit, we are basically making a user subscribe to a newsletter, a tapaScript newsletter. Maybe someday it will come up. And once the user gets subscribed, we are going to see the user who just now got subscribed. That's the intention, but in this case we have only completed the UI part of it, the form part of it, using ShatCN components. If you have missed the video, please take a look, because that's how you will know that how to create a form like this. Now we are going to put more functionalities into it. Now we'll be attaching a server action to this particular form, so that whenever the form gets submitted, we will invoke that function. And what is that function going to do? We will put the full name over here, and we will also put some email over here. And once user submit, we will invoke the server action. We will store this user information into MongoDB, and we will take up this email. We will set up an email provider and then send email to the person who is providing this particular email and subscribing to this newsletter, so the person gets actual email. Now, if you remember, the way that we have built this form was a client component. Let's take a look. So this was the form, subscription-form.jsx. This is what we had created, and it's written over here is a client component. And this form had an on submit. That also we have done. As I had submitted the full name and email, you can see the console.log clearly showing that email and the full name that I had submitted. So now I can kickstart by creating a server action and attach the server action to this particular form. So here, the pattern, the invocation pattern that we are talking about is calling a server action from the client component. Once we finish this, we'll also see other invocation pattern and we'll talk about them. You can create a server action quite easily inside the app folder. So in the app folder, create a new folder called actions. And inside the actions folder, you can have one file like index.js or index.ts. And inside that, you can actually create how many ever actions you need. But I generally prefer creating separate file for different actions, because that's how I can manage them better. So I'll create a new file and I'll say email.js, because my server action is going to send an email. I can also call this as subscribe.js, because my action is about subscription. That also I can do. Now this email.js, what is going to do is going to send an email, but I have to define a function here, asynchronous function, so that I can invoke that from my subscription form. So first, let's create an asynchronous function, export async function, and let's say send email. It can accept form data once the form gets submitted. And over here, I'll be writing all this stuff. Okay. Now, when you perform an action using this function, there might be an error scenario. It might happen that the sending email gets failed, or there is a error because of some null or undefined. There could be various scenarios. So how do you report those error? In those cases, you handle error simply using try and catch. That's JavaScript, pure JavaScript. So here you do catch error, and then from here you do throw new error. You have e.message. All right. So it means that if there is an error that occurs inside this try, it will catch here and it will rethrow this one. And wherever we are calling this particular server action or the function from, we'll be able to again handle that particular error over there. As we'll be calling this from a client component over here, we'll be able to get this error into our client component and do whatever we want to do with this. Great. Now for now, let us just do a console.log of a few things. What are those things? The things are which are getting submitted through this particular form data. What are the things we are expecting from this form data? What is there in our form? In our form, if we see, we have full name and email. That's how we have defined the schema for our form, if you remember. So it means whenever we are submitting this form, inside these values, which is our form data, we'll be able to see this full name and email, which we have seen already using the console.log. That means if we are able to call this particular server action, this send email, over here, I'll be able to pass this full name and email to this particular function through this form data, and I'll be able to act on it. But hold on. This particular function is straight away a normal asynchronous JavaScript function. Where are we even saying that this is going to run on server? Where are we actually marking this as a server action? That's why you have to use a directive called use server if you want to keep all your server action in a separate file and you want to bring them into your component. In that file at the top, you have to give this directive called use server so that Next.js knows it very well that it has to execute all the functions in this file as server actions. That's how I made this function as a server action. Now from form data, if I'm passing this, I'll be getting a full name and email. That means I can pretty easily do const email form data of email and calls full name form data of full name. All right. Now let me just do email comma full name over here. I'm just logging it. And coming over here in my subscription form, I'm going to import this guy, import send email from app actions email, and this send email going to on submit, knocking off this console.log. I have to call it over here and I can pass these values. Okay, this is great. But isn't it an async function? Yes. So that means it has to be await. And if it is await, this one has to be an async function. This is the change that you have to do. After this, we have handled the error over there. We have thrown an error in case there is an error scenario. So you have to do a try catch definitely over here. And I'll do a catch E. And for now, let me just do console.error E. We will be showing this error in a much better way through a toaster and all in the meantime. But let me just see, like once I submit this, whether this is getting invoked and I'm able to print this email and full name or not. So here goes my UI, Tapas Adhikari name and then email. I'm going to do a submit. Once the form submitted, I come back to email.js. This particular console.log is showing what I have submitted, the email and the name. So it means the client component to the server action, attaching them together, that part is done. Now next, we are going to really send an email and want to store this information to MongoDB. These are the two things. But I also want to introduce toaster here because if there is a success scenario or error scenario, we want to show the toast. In the last video, I have showed you like how to install a shared CN component. I have installed something called Sonar. It's a great toaster component. I like this one. And I'm going to configure this a bit. Come to the layout.js file at the root of our application. And here import toaster from Sonar. And then somewhere at the bottom, maybe just over here after your theme provider, here you can actually initialize this component and say like where you want to see the toast in case the toast appears. So for that you can do toaster position equals to bottom right so that it will come always in this position bottom right. And we are also saying this toaster can come in rich colors. That's why we are actually passing this attribute. That's it. Nothing more than this we have to do. Now coming to our subscription form, here to show the toast, we can import toast from Sonar and then take this toast. In case there is an error, we can show like toast.error e.message. In case of success, we can do like success and a proper message like the full name subscribe successfully. Now at this stage, we can test out this particular toaster. Let me press submit. I can see Tapas subscribed successfully, though we have not subscribed, that logic we have not written, but we have set the stage. All right, so next few things. One is we have to configure MongoDB so that we can store this user through server action to MongoDB. And second, we have to do the email configuration. Let's start with MongoDB configuration. If you are following this series for a while now, you know that I have showed how to persist the user using next-auth credential provider to MongoDB. The MongoDB part should not be new to you, but if you are starting afresh or first time you are seeing this, there are a few things that you need to know, and I'm going to quickly cover them because every video covering the same thing might not make a lot of sense. Okay, what we are doing here, I am creating a collection called subscribers, and I've created the collection subscribers under a database called tapaScript, and the tool I am using to do that is called MongoDB Compass that I have installed locally along with the MongoDB that installed locally. All right, so it's connecting to my local MongoDB and I have this setup done. Now what I have to do, I have to from here copy the connection string. I have copied the connection string. I'll go and create a .env file, and inside that I'll put this connection string, and through this connection string I'll be able to connect to this MongoDB instance, this particular database, and then I'll be creating a model for this collection so that I can interact with this collection. By interacting, I mean I can query from this particular collection, or I can mute it. I can insert data, create data, update data for this collection, and all these things I'm going to do from my code. All right, so next thing, let's create a file called .env.local, and here let us paste the connection string. Make sure that you are also appending the database name. In my case it is tapaScript, in your case it can be something else. So I have this connection string. Now I'll be creating a file called mongo.js inside lib, and here a few lines of code to get the connection, and these are the things I have explained so deeply in the previous videos where we started interacting with Mongo. So if you're coming along with other videos in this series, you already know this. Quickly to describe, this is the connection string I use from the env variable, and I'm using something called mongoose that I'll be installing now. I've imported and I'm doing a .connect and I'm getting a connection. So I have to install mongoose, and for that from the terminal I'm doing yarn add. As I'm using yarn, you can use any other stuff like npm, pnpm or burn. Excellent, mongoose is installed. I'll close this up. And now I have to initialize this particular connection. So I'll do it from the layout because that's top of the hierarchy. I'm going to import dbconnect here, and then over here I'll make this layout as an async because dbconnect is an asynchronous call. I'll make it as await and I'll say dbconnect. So my connection is established over here. Now the next thing I'll be focusing on creating a model that can map to the collection. What are those things that we want to store into that collection? Definitely the full name that I'm getting from the form, the email I'm getting from the form, maybe when the person subscribed, the particular date, or if we implement unsubscription in future, whether the person has already unsubscribed or not, some flag for that, right? If a person is unsubscribed later point in time, we don't want to delete them from our database because we want to keep the record. In future, we might send a mail or something saying that, hey, why don't you subscribe back, or things like that. So it's always good to retain those users, right, in our database. All right. So for that, I have to now create a model. So at the root of your project, create a new folder called model. Under models, let's create a new file for our model. It's called subs-model.js. Any name you can give. And as you know, again from the previous video, I'm saying is like you have to create a schema that define what you're going to store inside the collection. And using the schema, you will be creating a model. Now for creating the schema, again, you need mongoose. So let's import mongoose and schema from mongoose. And after that, we are going to create a schema, which is nothing but a simple JSON object that we have to pass to this particular schema. So it's like this, a simple JSON object we have to pass. Inside this, we have to define what are the attributes that we want to store. And once the schema is defined, the last part is to create the model and export it from here. So we'll be doing in this way. We have created a model using mongoose.model, and the model name is subscriber, and we are passing this particular schema. What mongoose is going to do, it's going to take this name and it is going to make it small case and pluralize, means it will make a plural a word of this. A plural word of subscriber is subscribers, and if you make it a small case, it is like subscribers, and then it will map to a collection which is subscribers I have already created. So the mapping will be done appropriately. All right, you understood. Now, if this particular thing is already created, we don't want to create that instance again. That's why we're using this nullish coalition operator, so that we check for it. If the Model is already created, return that. If it is not created, create a new one and return that. And that is the subscriber. The only thing left over here is to create the attributes that we want to store. The first attribute that we want to store is name. And this name is definitely a required attribute and it's of type string. Similarly, along with name, we also get email, that's also required, type is string. And we want to store like at what point of time or which date this particular user or this particular subscribers have got subscribed. So for that, we can create another attribute called created at, required as true, type is date, and we're defaulting it to date.now. So that from UI, I don't have to pass any value. Whenever this model is helping a record to be inserted in a collection, it will take that particular timestamp of time. Okay. And the last thing, we want to take a Boolean value called unsubscribe and want to default it to false, so that whenever somebody subscribe, it defaulted as false. Later point of time, somebody unsubscribe, we'll find that particular user and we can turn it to true. Okay, you can actually take that as a task to unsubscribe, how users unsubscribe. Okay, I'll explain that towards end. All right, so this is our model. Now, as the model is there, let us create another file for doing this Mongo queries or that, or let's say kind of data exchange, right? For us, the thing that we'll be dealing with MongoDB is pretty simple. Is about querying and finding out by email if a user is already subscribed. If the user is not subscribed, create the subscription. That's it we are going to cover in this video. But in future, if you want to take it along and want to add other functionality around subscription, you might want to add other MongoDB related queries and the mutations in the same file. So it's always better that we create that file and keep it for you so that you can utilize it in a later point in time. So I'm going to create a new folder called queries. Inside queries, I'm going to create index.js file. And over here, I'm going to create a method to fetch all the subscribers in my collection. Why? Because whenever I'm adding a subscriber, I want to fetch all the subscribers and want to show the subscribers somewhere at the right side, right? So for that reason, I'm going to say export async function. Again, it has to be an async function. It's a server side get subscribers. And how do we get it? But before that, let's do again our regular procedure of error handling. So inside this, I now need the model that I just now created. So import subscriber from the model. And here I can tell const subscribers equals to await the model subscriber dot, the method is called find, and I want to get everything. And then I don't want to get all the metadata information from the MongoDB. I'm just leaning it down. Now, after this, again, in the previous videos, I'm referring it because I've done it multiple times before, is when Mongo returns the data, the ID it returns at underscore ID. Now, if you want, you can actually translate that underscore ID to simple ID so that underscore ID doesn't return the string, as such straight away. You have to always do .toString so that in your UI layer, you don't have to do that everywhere. So in this layer itself, you can translate all the underscore IDs inside the subscribers and replace that with a ID property, which will have the string representation of that underscore ID object ID value. So for that, I can write a utility function. I'll go to lib again, and here I'll create a new file called transform.js and write a simple array utility where I take an array and I identify like, there is an underscore ID for each of the element in the array. I'm doing an underscore ID.toString and assigning to a new property in that array, and rest of the property of that array element remains same. And then I am actually mapped array I am returning back. So that means if I'm taking an array in that there are multiple objects and each of the object is having an underscore ID, it is being replaced with an ID property with the value of underscore ID. On top of that, there is a toString applied. That's it. So this is for the safe side so that I don't have to do this toString again and again in the client side. That's all. So coming here, I'm going to import that replace Mongo ID in array. And then just before returning, I can do return replace Mongo ID in array and I'm passing this subscribers. That's it. This is what my get subscribers method. Now I can keep the create subscriber method here. I can create any kind of filtration method here. Everything I can create in this index.js file and I can keep pulling them wherever I need it. All right. Now my interest factor is as the Mongo thing is done. Now, as this thing is done, the next thing that I would think about creating the subscription, right? So for that, I'll go to the form. This is my subscription form. From here, I am already doing the send email. So it means as I'm receiving these details like tapas@email.com, the first thing that I can check using this email, whether there is already an entry in the database or not. If the entry is not found, then create a new entry. Now, any dealing that you have to do with MongoDB, especially that collection, I have to do it through model. So first, import the subscriber model, first thing. After importing the subscriber model, once you have this email in your hand, you can first check whether the email is passed through the form at all or not. This is a basic check, though we have a form validation, but still an extra check. If the email is not passed, I can actually return a null, or I can actually throw a new error message itself. Please provide an email, right? This is a safe-sided thing. Now, the next thing that I want to do, I want to check whether this email is exist into my collection already or not. So I'll do const found subscriber equals to await taking my model. And now in my collection for one email, there will be only one entry because email is unique. So I'll say find one, and here I can pass a filter criteria, say where email matches the email that is being passed. That's it. On top of that, I can also do a lean so that I don't care for all the metadata. Okay, I've done the formatting of it. Let me do a console.log of found subscriber over here so that I can print it in case there is a debugging required. Now, after this, I can say if this particular subscriber is not found by this email, it's time that we create one, right? So for that, first we'll create a payload called subscriber payload. And here we want to insert a name because that's what we have defined in our model. And the value of it is going to be full name, whatever we're getting into this particular server action, and email is email, and rest of the thing I don't have to do because there is a default value for created at and the unsubscribed, right? Now, once this is done, the next thing I can do is await again the model subscriber dot create. Okay, this is again coming from Mongoose, and just pass this particular payload that we have created. That's it. If using this email ID, the subscriber is not found, is going to insert a new subscriber to my database. If there is an error, it will throw an error. Can we test this much? Yes, we can. Let's go ahead and test. So let's insert a full name, Tapas Adhikari, atapas@email.com, and I'll do submit. I get Tapas Adhikari subscribed successfully. We have already given it, but main point here is to go ahead and refresh this and see whether the data has come or not. Excellent. I can see Tapas Adhikari has come, email created at default value, unsubscribe false. Now, can I try again to create the same user into the database for the subscription? It should give me an error. What error it should give? That error I need to handle. So I have this if over here. Here I can do an else, and from here I can throw a new error, and I can say this email subscribed to tapaScript already. All right, so let's see if that happens. I have Tapas Adhikari again, atapas@email.com, submit, atapas.email.com, subscribe to tapaScript already. So I have that safeguarded thing. So this is how with server action, we know how to do data fetching and how to do data mutation. In our example, we have taken MongoDB, one use case of server action. Couple of days back, I asked you this question, like, what are the use cases that you want to see of server actions? And thank you very much who have responded to this. Some of the responses are really mind blowing. You have given a lot more use cases, like you do a post API call, you do some image thing and all. Everything is possible. Basically, it's just about building that logic and getting things done where fundamental remains same. So next thing that we are going to take advantage of server action is to send an email, right? So let's go ahead and do that. For sending email, I'm going to use a service called Resend. And I found this service quite good is because of the plan, of course. The free plan is about $0 per month, and it gives up to 3,000 emails per month and 100 emails per day, which is good for me for creating courses like this, or using it for my pet projects as well. Now to get started, you just need to sign in. After you're done with your sign in, you come to this API keys, this left navigation, and create your new API key. I have created already. And after doing that, if you want, only then you can actually map it to a domain. If you have a domain, I have tapascript.io, so I map to a subdomain of it called noreply. So noreply.tapascript.io, it means that my mail will go from noreply@noreply.tapascript.io. Okay, so all the mails will go from that. But if you don't have a domain, don't worry about it. The default domain, whatever is the onboarding domain, once you create it, you will know that particular domain. You will see the mail is coming from that onboarding at recent itself, right? So that is fine. After that, as and when you send mail, you also get to see them as metrics, like how many mails you are sending, what are the mails that went in. I was doing some testing, so it all worked for me. If there is a bounce, why it is bouncing? Because the mail ID probably is wrong and all this kind of stuff. Now please copy this API key that you have created and come to your .env.local file and paste it over there. So I have pasted my recent keys over here. Go back to your email.js file. Here you have to first import recent, and for that you have to install recent. So I'll go ahead and open a terminal and let me install with yarn add recent. So recent is installed. Now coming to email.js, I can import recent. So I've imported recent from recent, quite straightforward. And now I have to initialize recent using that recent API key. So here I'll be creating an instance of it. Const recent equals to new recent. This recent is coming from this import. And here I have passed this recent API key, which is there in my env local file. Excellent. Now, usually I'll be sending this mail only when I am able to successfully store the subscriber to the DB. Otherwise, it might happen like I have sent the mail, but the subscriber have not stored into the DB due to some exception. So I will always initiate the mail sending after I have successfully created the subscriber. So after this line. So here for mail sending, I have to first form a message. Message means what message I want to give it in the mail body. So let's give a message like, Dear full name, thank you for subscribing to tapaScript's newsletter. The door towards the abundance of knowledge is now open. Enjoy. Okay, so some message I have given. And here I'll be calling this send function from recent. So await recent dot email dot send. Yes. Here I have to pass certain options or the parameters. From where you are sending this mail to, where you are sending this mail to, what is the subject of this mail, and then how are you handling this particular message body. For us, we'll be handling through a React component. It means I can pass this message to another React component where I can do a lot of formatting and all, maybe a bigger heading, a little padding, margin and all these things. And through that, I can actually send the message body to the recipient, right? So in this case, to do it that way, instead of text, I can do React. Okay, so ultimately my from is, I told no reply at no reply.tapascript.io. That's how I have configured my subdomain. I know it's a little bit crazy having two no replies. You can configure your custom domain, or you can give that onboarding at recent. And then two is the email that I am receiving in my server action. And then subject is congratulations, you have subscribed to tapaScript's newsletter. Hey, great. And then the message I got, I am passing to a component called email template as a props. This component doesn't exist now. We are going to create this component right away. So to create this component, let's go to the components folder over here and right click, new file, email-template.jsx. Here, let's create export const email template taking the props message, and here return a div and just print the message. That's it, a simple React component, but we can make it better. I'll come to that in a while. Now let's go to this email template, import this guy into our action. I have this email template and I'm using it over here and I'm passing this message. So it seems things should work now. Now I should have a user subscribe to the database, and at the same time, I should be able to issue an email to that particular user. Let's give it a try. So right now I have one user into the database whose email ID is atapas@email.com. Now I'm going to send to my real email ID so that I can actually verify this email is reaching me. All right, so I'll give a name. In this case, I'm giving just tapas A because other one was tapas Adhika, just to distinguish my real email ID. And I'm going to say submit. Tapas A subscribe successfully. So first thing I'm going to do is to go to the database, refresh and see the second entry comes up. Yes, it does. tapas.adhikari@gmail.com, and let me go to my email address as well. Woohoo, I see a new mail. Congratulations, you have subscribed. Congratulations, you have subscribed to tapaScript's newsletter. Dear Tapas A, this is the name I had given. Thank you for subscribing to tapaScript's newsletter. The door to okay, it's done. Excellent. Now you can go further you can actually do a lot of stuff with how this email templating can happen. Now that is strictly not part of server action video, but let me quickly give you an insight like how to get this thing done. It's a bonus. If you come to recent.com again, under docs, there is something called email templates. You can find it out. And in the email template section, there is a mention about React email. Once you click on React email, it's gonna open a new tab where it says the next generation of writing emails, and it's true. They provide some out of the box awesome templates that you can use. You can explore them. You can install them. Actually, is going to get all the sources to you so that you can utilize, you can edit them whatever way. Or I'll go and explore the components, and over here I'll find certain components over there. Like all these email templates, if you want to customize by yourself, should be embedded inside something called a HTML component. In that, if you want a button to be clicked by your user from the email, there will be a button, there is a container, there's a text, there will be image, everything you can do. So let's go to HTML and let's copy. As I'm using yarn, using this particular command, let me just install this guy. Let's install. So the React email has been installed. I'll close this out. I'll go to email template.jsx, and here I'm going to import certain components from the React email components, the one that we have seen just now. We have imported HTML, heading, body, container, preview text, and this code is there in their documentation as well. You can take other code also from their documentation and get inspired from. And my main motive over here to utilize this message in much beautiful and the structured way. So for that, the JSX whatever we have, a simple div with a message, I'm going to replace it with a much better structured JSX where we have HTML, inside that have head, and there is a preview. Thank you for joining our newsletter. And then a body, inside that there is a container, inside that there is a heading, tapaScript newsletter, and inside that there is a text where I'm showing this message instead of showing it only using that div. Now you have seen the message that went in the email. Now again, let's trigger this and see how it goes this time. But for that, I'm going to remove this user from here because we have put a check. If the same email user exists, we are not going to allow them. So my insert will fail, thus my email won't go. So I'm going to delete this. I've deleted it. I'll come back to my UI again, and now let's send it. All right, subscribe successfully. Come to DB, refresh again, entry got, go to my mail. I got another mail. Now see over here, tapaScript newsletter is quite differently now, and you have a more structured way of rendering this particular text compared to how it used to be before. This was the first instance, and this is just now 0 minutes ago. Is much more structured. So this is how you can structure the email as well. So it took some time to understand the first pattern because we built something ground up with Mongo, recent, storing the data, mutating the stuff, fetching the data, sending email, etc. Now let's go and quickly understand the other patterns as well. Up next, we're going to understand two patterns: from server components and passing as props. From client components, we just now did. Now to demonstrate the pattern, the invocation pattern of a server action from the server component, let us create one. So under apps, let us create another route called test. And inside that, let's create a server component, which is our page itself. Let's give a name called test page to this component, and let's create a quick JSX over here. And in this case, we are going ahead with the form again, and we will do a form action. We'll try to create a server action that invoke from that form submission. All right. So for that purpose, let us create a very simple form. Here is a form with some style, which is having an input hidden type, sending a customer ID, value is 001. You know about hidden field already, right? It's from HTML. Like you don't see these fields on your UI, rather you are passing it internally, the value of it. Then we have an input field, which is a number field through which I can actually insert an amount. And then I have a button, and it is going to create an invoice. As I have this button, I have to import this button from my components UI button, which is already there through shatcn. Great. So can I access this? So if I go to /test, oh, oops, I missed the default export. Here it is. I have this number, and I have this create invoice. I can click on this create invoice, and the form is getting submitted. You can also see right at the top, the form is getting submitted. Now, how can I invoke a server action from the server component itself? It's pretty easy. To do that, you can create a server action inside this particular server component itself. So for example, let us create a server action called async function. It has to be async, create invoice, and it will take the form data, and inside that we can do a lot of stuff. But one important thing is, if you are following this pattern where within the server component itself you are declaring a server action, you have to tell Next.js that this is not a regular async function, this is rather a server action, and for that please use this use server directive at the first line of your function. Okay, that's the only thing that you need to know. Now coming here, let's do something like a payload. Now as I'm sending these things through form, so I have to first add an action attribute, and with this action attribute, I'll be first putting create invoice over here, so that whenever the form gets submitted, this create invoice gets called, and all this input fields values comes as a form data. So it means inside payload, I can now retrieve customer ID using form data.get customer ID, which is the name of this, form data.get amount, which is the name of this particular field. So I have this customer ID, I have this amount. Now if I want to say just console.log of payload, great, I should be able to see this payload. After this, what we'll do, you can mute it, collection in DB. After this, send email, whatever you want to do. Basically, we know this part. We have seen it already with the subscription thing. All right. So let's see if this gets called, and this payload, whatever I am passing through this particular form, I'm able to catch it inside the server action and able to print it or not. So over here, I'm going to give 100 and say create invoice. You see over here, customer ID value is 001 because this is what I've hard coded as a hidden value, and amount is coming 100 because that is what I'm passing through the UI. Now taking this value, it's up to you. What are you going to do? Because this is at the server side, you're already telling Next.js that this is at the server side. You can create an invoice with this one. So this is another invocation pattern that you can keep in your mind. Excellent. Now let's talk about other invocation pattern where you can pass this as a props. So I can actually take this one itself. What I can do inside this test route, let's create a new folder just to demonstrate this one. So here we don't have any generic components. We have components which are only related to this particular route. Here, let's create a form.jsx, and it's the same thing. The JSX, whatever we have here, I just lifted it. I put it over here, and this create invoice, now it is expected to come as a props. I'm passing it to this action. That's it. Now the change that I can do over here at this form is now gone out as a different component. I can now import a form from this components form, and instead of doing all this, I just commented out, I can now call a form create invoice equals to, I'm passing the create invoice as a props. So will this work? Let us give it a try. I'll refresh. This time let me give a different value, maybe 234. Create invoice. I see over here customer ID will remain same 001 because I have not changed that over here, but the value I'm getting from the UI is now 234 for the amount. So this pattern is also working with us. Excellent. Now let's go back to this diagram. We have seen all of this from server components, from client components, passing as props, all this pattern with form. Now without form as well, the server actions you can invoke. How do we do that? So there are two examples I have. One is with use effect, another is with event handlers. I'm going to show them. One of the example you would find it in the documentation itself, but I'm going to explain that to you. Let's say I have another server action which is called blog.js. I have created inside actions the same way that I had email.js. Now what it does, basically there is a function called add comment. So the action is about add a comment to a post. So it takes a comment and the post ID. Once it gets the comment and the post ID, it can make a DB call. It can store the comment into the DB for that particular post ID. That's what it can do. This portion, again, I'm not writing because I have showed you for one example, for the subscription example. Similarly, if you want to improvise on that, please do this. That's how you learn. You learn by doing practice, not by just following the YouTube videos. All right, so you have add comment. That's great. Now I have another component called add-post.jsx, a pure client component, pure React component called course comment, which takes a post ID as a props from somewhere, let's assume. And then it has a state called comment. I have hard coded a comment called some comment, and I'm passing this post ID and the comment to this add comment coming from this particular blog actions. Easy, no? So I've created this particular server action called add comment over here. I have imported it over here, and I'm calling this on a button click. Please notice there is no form. There is no action. There is no on submit. I'm doing direct on click and calling this async function directly from here. Now let's take this one, course comment. Let's go to our test page that we had created, right? And here, let us import course comment, okay? This particular component. And inside server component, you can use client component very well. So coming here at the bottom, I'm going to use course comment, and course comment actually expects post ID as a prop. So post ID, let's give a post ID, say P001, for example, some dummy post ID. Now, can we try it out? So what will happen now? If I have this component up and running inside my test page and I'm clicking on this add comment, post ID will come as P001, comment is initialized with some comment. That means this particular comment and the post ID should get passed over here. And after it get passed over here, it comes to block.js, it should get printed over here. That's my objective. Let's see if that works. So I have add comment, this particular button from the component. I'll just click on this. I've clicked on it. I'll go to my code, VS Code. Do you see this? Some comment and P001 is in my server action. By the way, I'm using Console Ninja. A lot of people ask like which particular extension I'm using, so that I don't have to go to either browser console or my terminal console to see this console.log. I can see it within the code itself. It's more flexible. All right. So this is how it works. So now you learn the other pattern where you don't have a form, but on a button click, you can invoke a server action. Now let's talk about the last pattern, the fifth pattern. The fifth pattern is about inside use effect. So here I have taken another example, and this example, as it is available in the documentation, Next.js documentation as well. So here what it does, inside the blog itself, let's assume now, I have not written, but let's assume there is another server action called increment views, right? It can make a DB call and increment the view count in the DB. Okay. Now what we are doing here in the use effect itself, whenever this component first time loading the view count component, it is just incrementing the view count by 1, setting a state of these views, and these views you are showing over here. So it means every time somebody coming to your web page, this particular component gets mounted. As it gets mounted, it calls this particular server action. The server action does a mutation and the database, increase the count by 1, return the updated count that you show into your UI. Simple. So the use case again here, there is no form, no button, but something that you need probably once. Maybe once you scroll down, you want to do some action on the database you want to store, get the updated value and show it to user. That's it, you can do. Or on the load for the first time, or landing onto a particular page, you want to do certain kind of server actions. This is the use case where you should be using. I hope this pattern is also helpful and you will be using it. Now all the 5 patterns are done, but still we are not done with the crash course. We are not done with the video. Let's do one more important thing. I'll go back to our subscriber form where we are successfully able to subscribe a user. We are successfully able to send email. But if you remember, there is another component called subscribers.jsx from our previous video where we wanted to show like who are the user already got subscribed, correct? So for that, we have to do some code changes over here. So let's do this. You remember we have written get subscribers method to retrieve all the subscribers that are there in the DB. So that's there in the queries. So first we'll get this particular method from queries get subscribers, which is lifting all the subscribers from the DB and giving to us. And this is an async method. So of course, then I have to make this one async because I'm going to use await over here called subscribers equals to await get subscribers. Excellent. Now these subscribers, what are those? Console.log subscribers. Now for a moment, if I just go to the page, okay, and I come back to my VS Code, I'm seeing all the subscribers over here, correct? I can also see them, as I told, like in my, if it's a server component log, I can see them in my terminal. So I can see there are 2 subscribers and this is what it is coming out. So it means I have an array now. I can very easily map through this array. Very simple thing. In multiple occasions, we have seen this before. Take each of the subscriber out. We can actually show their name saying that, hey, Tapas Adhikari subscribed at this particular time. Very easily, right? So let's do that JSX very quickly. So instead of this div, this hard-coded part, I'm just going to get rid of this. And now I am mapping through the subscribers, taking each of the subscriber out, getting each of the subscriber ID, assigning them to key. And only thing that I'm interested in rendering here, the subscriber's name, saying, wow, the subscriber name subscribed, and subscribed on at what point of time or which date this particular person has subscribed. That's what I'm showing. So let's go back to UI. I have now two folks who have subscribed. I see them right away. Tapas Adhikari subscribed on this date. Wow, Tapas A subscribed on this date. Correct? Now, let us do one more subscription. And once we do the subscription, we expect that to come over here straight away. So for that, let's say Harry B, an imaginary character, bharry at gmail.com. I don't know whether really some user is there. Let me just put some random stuff so that it bounce. It doesn't go to, unnecessarily to some user. Now I do submit. Now, once the submission happened, I want the submitted user, the created user, that particular user entry to come here. That's my objective. Now I do submit. Harry B subscribed successfully. Great. But I don't see Harry B here. Now, if I go to database, if I refresh, gosh, I see Harry B. But Harry B is not appeared here unless I do a hard refresh. Then only Harry B comes here. Why? Why? Because at the backend, server action is mutating the data into the database, but the retrieval call for getting all the subscribers are cached into your UI side. Now, if you want to say that, hey UI, you are working on a stale cache, why don't you just refresh and revalidate your cache? You can actually do it from your server action as well. To showcase that one only, I'm just taking this example. So to do that, I'll go back to my server action once more. My server action that I'm dealing with is email.js. Now here I can import something called revalidate path, which is from next cache. And here, after all this thing happens successfully, I can revalidate the path that I'm looking for. For me, the path it has at the root, which is slash, so I'm revalidating the path as slash. If you have to revalidate something in the sub path, for example, slash test, slash abcd, slash something, you can also do that by passing that exact path over here. You can revalidate the path. For me, it is root, so I'm giving slash. Now let's run the same thing with a different user. Let's refresh. All good. Let's give a name call John B, email b john some number at gmail.com, and I'll do a submit. The submission happened. John B subscribed successfully. And I also see, wow, John B subscribed immediately. So it means my cache revalidation is happening from the server action itself. I don't have to hard refresh this piece again and again, and things are working fine. So excellent. So at the end of this crash course of Next.js app router server action, we have learned a lot of stuff. A quick recap. We have learned form handling at the client side. We have learned what is server action, what is the usefulness of it, and what are the different use cases possible. We learned about what are the invocation pattern possible, and we have built something with one of the invocation pattern where we have used MongoDB and the email services. All other invocation pattern also we have seen how to do. We have seen the code and we have done the stuff. We also have learned how to do the cache invalidation on the server action, and we have actually covered most of it that is there in the server action documentation. So before we end, I want to talk about a few pitfalls or few disadvantages that I feel the server action might bring. So one of the thing is like the entire usage model of a server action. I mean, traditionally, we are very comfortable that we have a client component where the form is and there is a REST API, and we'll be calling the REST API. The REST API will take care of the thing, give me the response, and I have the state in my client component, and using the state, I'll be doing a lot of stuff. Now, suddenly that particular model change and you have something which is within your code, there is no REST call, and you feel that I'm not making a call over the where, it is rather another function that I'm utilizing it. So this learning curve, the initial learning curve, is something that some people find it little crazy, but once you get used to it, I think it is great. Second thing is about, see, all these things, like I had created this model, right? And then you have seen me that inside the action itself, I did the query. I actually filtered out my subscription list by email to find out whether there is a already a subscription by the same email or not. So it means that I'm writing almost database query inside my action itself. Now, some people, some developer, some architect, they feel this is really a bad practice because things should be isolated. We should not be really combining these two, but server action gives this one and utilize this itself is as a power. So understanding that power and then being accustomed to that, I think that is again something that somebody has to really think about. So these are some of the things that I can think of. And again, server action is running on the server. That means when you're deploying your application, and if your server action is consuming so much of memory, in that case you got to be careful, because if you are having a SaaS solution and you have too many server actions, and those server actions are actually killing a lot of bandwidth on the deployed server, because those are getting executed over there, the amount of payload that you are passing across to server action, which has a limit, by the way, to 1 MB, but you can increase it. So you need to be mindful, like for which server action is really making sense to increase that particular payload bandwidth, or for which server action it has to be limited. So those are the things are new to many of us, as developer, to digest and then put forward the best design for our application. So apart from that, I think server action really rock, and I really like using it. I hope you do as well. So I hope this crash course was useful to you, and if so, why don't you let me know with a like and comment, so that it really motivates me to do better. And also, please subscribe, because that's the ultimate motivation any content creator look for, that more number of people are looking for their content and their videos, right? So don't shy away. So please provide your support by subscribing to tapaScript channel. Thank you very much. Stay well, stay good. Very soon going to come back with another really contentful video where you'll be enjoying and learning something cool stuff. Thank you very much.